Frenemies of the people. We're back. We love talking about politics, the media, and chaos. In fact, we are sponsored by uncertainty. So uh, it's available in large quantities. All you got to do is call. I'm Dennis, Patrick, Eleni. Our colleagues Natalie and Sienna are on assignment. So we will press on. And there is a lot of musical chairs right now in the state of Illinois, in the city of Chicago, among the political class. Lenny, help us sort through this craziness. At this hour, we this is what we know on Friday, the 25th, and I say that because when we post this in a little bit, my dog Barkley may decide that he's going to be running for one of the potentially open offices. There's at least one endorsement, high level endorsement coming for one of the candidates, but help us sort through this, Eleni.
Definitely. So, it was the biggest open secret that Senator Durbin would be announcing his reelection plans. And I think all signs were pointing to that he was not going to run again. And that would open up the U.S. Senate seat that he has held for 3 decades. And that sparked on Wednesday, when he finally broke the news that he was not going to be running for reelection, a mad dash to the start line, I would guess. Though many folks, we've learned, were already lined up yesterday morning, not even 24 hours after the announcement. Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton was out with her announcement and an ad highlighting why she should be the next U.S. Senator. And just in a couple hours, maybe within the hour, we're going to have Governor J.B. Pritzker endorse her for the primary. And so that has, been the first of what I anticipate will be many names that will come forward in the Democratic primary. We know that Representative Raja Krishnamurthy has a lot of cash in his chest ready to spend, and is a good friend and ally of Senator Durbin. So that's somebody that everybody's watching closely. But then there's the handful of other folks, and the trickle effect will be interesting. So, yeah, we'll see what happens.
Do endorsements matter? What do you all think?
Does it come with money?
Exactly what I was going to say, Patrick. I think, endorsements matter if there's some financial advantage to them. And I think, it's interesting to see Governor Pritzker come out right away supporting Juliana Stratton, because I think that implies that there will be some financial help there as well. And so if somebody like Representative Krishnamurthy enters the race as well, you might be able to match those dollars that he has with other dollars from Governor Pritzker.
And Congressman Krishnamurthy has, last I checked, close to $19 million that he's raised. So he is a proven money raiser, even though he doesn't have his own personal net worth that Governor Pritzker has. But if Governor Pritzker has ambitions of running for president, how much money is he going to devote to Juliana Stratton's campaign, or does it just come with the endorsement? And with that moving around, Eleni, there's other seats that people are jockeying for as these folks are potentially running to move up.
Sure. I mean, if the names that are out there step forward, so obviously you would have Representative Krishnamurthy's seat, you would have potentially Lauren Underwood's seat that has been named as somebody who's very interested in the race. So now, in addition to a U.S. Senate seat, we might see congressional seats open up as well that will then become more races for us to follow and see where those cards all fall. And then ultimately, we continue to wait to see Governor Pritzker's decision on if he's going to run for reelection. He has not formally made that decision yet. And I know that many people, think he might be running for president. So that's also going to dictate where money is spent and who gets involved in some of these races.
Patrick, while it seems uh, on its face that if you were going to run for president, you want to devote all of your time to running for president, but at the same time, if you're a governor, especially a big state governor, that's a great bully pulpit from which to launch a presidential campaign and continue to wage a presidential campaign while you're governing. And so one of the big parlor guessing games going on right now is what works better for Governor Pritzker's presidential ambitions: to be reelected, to run for reelection, go through the ardor of another statewide campaign while trying to launch a national campaign? Or do you step aside, let all of that craziness happen, and focus on your Washington ambitions?
I would say what we've observed from Pritzker's preferred method of being the head of the Democrat Party of Illinois is he likes message discipline and for there to be a top to bottom. In my opinion, this is kind of what we're doing. And we already will see a little bit of chaos occurring with the open democratic process of people nominating folks and running. If he steps aside, there will be a power vacuum in the state of Illinois in that to compete to be the next governor, you have to explain what you're going to do different than the incumbent governor. And so I think that would be something to tip the scale on why you would see him want to stay in office, so that there isn't people saying, here's what I'm going to do different and contest this and all of these other things. But there is also a bandwidth limitation, and people could begin to ask questions about, you're running for reelection, yet you're spending time a lot out of state. So it'll be balanced. I think the other thing we all observe is the ability of an incumbent governor to get free earned media, inject themselves into the press cycle is there. So no matter what, he's got a few years left on his term, but that is a proven method to injecting yourself into the news cycle, and being on the social platforms and all of those things. So I think time will tell, but as we talk about being sponsored by chaos, there's a lot of chaos there. Senate seats don't open up frequently. Constitutional seats in Illinois don't open up frequently. And I think we should all just prepare for the craziness that occurs.
And I suppose that if the governor did not run for reelection as governor, it is not out of the realm of possibility that Mercury goes into retrograde and a Republican wins the governor's seat, in which case now he's potentially getting fired on from behind while he's running nationally.
I think that's right. And I was going to say, oh, I'm sorry, Elaine. I was going to say one thing that I think will be very interesting in the Senate situation is the Illinois Democrats and the Colorado Democrats were some of the first to involve themselves in the other party's primary. And there are folks in the Senate game that have very long memories. And I don't know if people will decide that they want to, from the Republican side, sit around and try to get a preferred candidate for that map, because we've looked at it and it's a favorable map for Republicans this next cycle nationally. So if they wanted to make it a little bit more difficult for Democrats, you put a safe seat and you put some pressure on a safer seat. Do they have to spend a little bit more money, et cetera? So time will tell, but is there a push for a Republican force to try to divide and pick a different candidate that's going to be the U.S. Senate candidate for the Democrat Party? Take some influence there. If nothing else, Dennis, as you always say, political retribution lasts a long time. But also it would amplify and change the calculus of what's going to occur for control of the Senate in that next cycle.
And like you said, Dennis, earlier, another name that's been floated out there is Darren LaHood, who's a Republican congressman, and that seat would open up if he were to choose. But I do think it will be, despite it potentially being a good cycle for Republicans, I think things are a little different here in Illinois, and it is an uphill battle. And we would be talking, I can't imagine the amount of money that would have to be spent in order to get a Republican over the finish line here in Illinois and for a statewide office.
But still, it is under the law. We do have a Republican nominee that will be running
Mm-hmm.
against a Democrat. We just don't know who that will be. And a guy like Congressman LaHood has to figure out if he wants to step away from a relatively safe seat. And there are some
Mm-hmm.
other folks that we know of from Republican politics who are taking a hard look at running for that office. Um, Meanwhile, at City Hall, the nonsense continues, and a couple of folks who may be squaring off for a political office, or maybe someone who's got a much higher ambition. Former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel uncharacteristically eschewed firing back at Brandon Johnson after the mayor took off on Rahm Emanuel, saying that he had temerity to be considering running for office, and that there's been a long, this is according to Fran Spielman, one of our favorite reporters at the Sun-Times, there's been a quote, long sustained movement in Chicago to push back against the neoliberal agenda that Emanuel championed to set up austere budgets targeting African Americans and the public accommodations that support them. And then he tried to compare Rahm to President Trump. We know former Mayor Emanuel pretty well at our firm, and he certainly never shied from a fight, even a fight that maybe wasn't always helpful to the cause that he was working on. But in this case, he tossed the ball to the raging Cajun James Carville. So James Carville weighing in Chicago politics and just went after Mayor Johnson in a way that I don't think anyone has locally. So a couple of his quotes were, Chicagoans are going to ask themselves whose judgment do they trust, Brandon Johnson's or Barack Obama's, referring to the fact that President Obama brought Rahm on to be his chief of staff. And Carville finished his raging with Franz Spielman saying, quote, incompetent people are jealous of competent people. What is going on?
Ooh. I mean, I actually think, Brahm was not going to respond to that as he shouldn't have. That would be, in my eyes, punching down for him. And right now, as I think we all believe, he is assessing a potential reentry into Illinois politics and where that seat might be. He is taking the high road by letting others fight his battles for him. And I think that, you know, it's safe to say that he, is one that we've all seen in the ring and he is not afraid to bring on a fight. And I think he's probably just saving that fight for a potential opponent when he decides what seat that's going to be that he might run for.
And this came up in the context of the mayor announcing that he was going to be heading down to Springfield to get funding for the CTA and Chicago Public Schools and other city wish list needs. And Governor Pritzker had a little backhanded comment at the mayor as well, saying that it's April and we put our budget together in the latter half of the prior year. So it'll be hard for us to talk about things in the current budget. And yet the CTA has, just alone, the CTA problem is probably approaching $1 billion. So what is going to happen in Springfield for the city of Chicago? What do you think, Patrick?
The same thing that always happens. they cry that they don't have enough money, they get something, and then they go back and nothing changes.
I mean, not every budget can be as balanced as Naperville's, you know? But I will say, it is very traditional that the mayor of Chicago will go to Springfield towards the end of session, early or end of April, beginning of May, to kind of seal the deal on what he's looking for. So the visit itself, to me, is not surprising. It's, hey, what has been happening for the last several months? Your staff and, your team talking to Springfield and asking them for what you want. Have you had any of those conversations? Or you think they're going to start when you go down there? Because that's not how that works. And I think, we saw a little bit of that with Lori Lightfoot in the beginning of her tenure. You don't just show up and expect something to happen. That takes a lot of work. And I would hope that Mayor Johnson understands that, but common sense is not so common.
I'll
Well,
say
go ahead,
if
Patrick.
I could, because I think there's two aspects that I find interwoven between what we were just talking about. Mayor Emanuel, while sharp and opinionated and a street fighter, was very strategic. And you could never argue he didn't have a multi-year plan and he didn't see things through on a long time horizon. And so when you contrast that, and even back to his reentry into politics, the Democrat Party in polling right now is among its lowest favorability ever, or going back at least to the early 90s. And there are two periods of time when the Democrat Party had favorability ratings in the high 60s. And it was when a young political operative named Rahm Emanuel was advising Bill Clinton. And it was when a younger-ish Rahm Emanuel, or slightly older-ish, was advising President Obama. And so I think the Democrat Party ignores Rahm Emanuel at their peril. I think the Republican Party should fear his reentry, because there's been a significant realignment of interests and things. And he's an incredibly skilled politician, but he's also a doer. And, you could take a look at the amount of construction cranes in the city of Chicago right now. I think there's 4. The system is blinking, and someone like an Emmanuel can come in and change the dynamic, whether he's the official candidate or whether he's controlling some folks behind the scenes. But there's, I think, that game is going to continue to play out. But you can just view it like the visits when Rahm would come down, or Mayor Daley before him. These weren't just pickup games of basketball. It was, hey, we're finishing the deal. Let's sign on the bottom line. And that aspect of governing in the political sphere, especially in today's society at all levels, seems to be missing. But if there's a return to that, you might see some folks benefit from that.
Yeah, those are some good points. And in fairness to Mayor Johnson, there is always a tension between Chicago and, quote unquote, downstate. And even Mayor Daley had some moments with the leaders, although he definitely had a great operation in Springfield and developed a track record of success down there. And oftentimes it was in a way that you weren't expecting it. Mayor Emanuel, the same can be said. Mayor Lightfoot certainly picked some fights, but got some things done as well. So perhaps this is a sign that Mayor Johnson is at least going to engage, albeit he's starting a little late. He has added some new members to his lobbying team, and he's heading down to Spring Patch. Okay, this is the time of our show where we normally talk about the Gen Z update, but none of us fall into that category because Sienna is busy. So it's definitely not sus, though, and hopefully she won't clap back. All right, let's talk about what's going to be terrible besides me trying to talk Gen Z. I'll start so that we can have, the big finish with Eleni, who really understands terribleness more than anybody. To me, and anybody who's been in my space the past few days understands that I'm really, really happy about the Kennedy construction project and how that's going. A lot of great progress being made. And so, because you can't drive on the Kennedy, I mean, it's great if you want to sit and sort of watch construction, or if you want to burn fuel. But if you actually want to get to where you got to go, you have to take one of the great alternates. And from my undisclosed location up north, Elston is historically a great cut through. Since I was, just a mere lad going into the city to work, you drive down Elston, you pass the CTA station, you pass the Secretary of State station. Maybe you can get a hot dog and a muffler. You go on a little bit further, you get to Bucktown. You keep going. But then a few years ago, when Mayor Emanuel was still mayor, he added the bike lanes. That caused some constricting, and it's not safer. In fact, I know someone who got in a really bad accident driving their bike on Elston. When you get to Elston and Milwaukee, it's the hipster highway. It seems to work for the bike people and the scooter people, but it's definitely slowed traffic up. But now that the Kennedy is at an impasse, everybody's gone to Elston, and you might as well be sitting on the Kennedy. So, Elston Avenue, you're terrible. You're going to be terrible. You're going to remain terrible. Everything is terrible getting into the city for me. So that's my take. Patrick, what's terrible in Naperville? And it's really hard. It's harder for you because you're in Naperville.
Well, aside from the fact that learning that the boss is dealing with significant traffic congestion every morning, so all of the team members here at Colleton are looking forward to that terribleness. I think this will be a few months probably in the offing, but I'm going to say what's going to be terrible is the nonstop barrage of political ads we are going to unearth. Senate races are more hotly contested in a state than a presidential race. And it's going to be open season, and it's going to be frustrating, and we're all going to be wanting to see the ads for the tariff-free cars or the tariff-free refrigerators by now before this goes in, because it's just going to be a lot of political ads filling every single one of our feeds, every single screen we look at. It's going to be open season unless there's a giant field clearing activity, which I would be shocked to see.
Could be good for the voiceover actors, though. Patrick Scar believes in higher taxes.
I know you're not the biggest fan of AI and robots, but I think the voice actors might be the first to be replaced.
Yeah, it does seem that way. Eleni, what's
I mean,
terrible?
Patrick, you stole my real answer, because that is something that I am dreading significantly, and not even just for the Senate race, but all the races. I think we've seen year after year the amount of ads just multiplies every year. It doesn't even matter who's running. So that's gonna be terrible. But probably what's really gonna be terrible is the Frozen Junior musical at Onahan Elementary this evening at 5 o'clock. So wish me luck. It's gonna be terrible.
So
In the
by the time
words,
you all see this, Eleni will have sat through and enjoyed Frozen at Onahan School. And we hope it's not as terrible as she predicts. That is Frenemies of the People. I have one other little personal note. When I was just a baby reporter, I got mentored by a great journalist at WMAQ All News Radio in Chicago, Nancy Benson. She stayed a great friend over 30 years. She put me together with another great colleague of ours, Lynn Holly, and we taught a class for a decade at U of I. Thanks to Nancy, she brought all sorts of people together, and she died rather suddenly for those of us who weren't in daily contact with her. She got cancer back in February and died this week. So rest in peace, Nancy. The news watch never stops, and neither do Frenemies of the People. Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.